The security guard's radio crackled as Serafina Whitmore pressed herself against the mahogany door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She shouldn't have wandered into the private wing of the Blackthorn mansion, but the bathroom downstairs had been occupied, and Champagne had a way of making decisions for you. "Miss, you can't be up here." The guard's voice echoed from the hallway. She'd just escaped. Serafina turned the brass handle behind her, slipping into what she hoped was another bathroom. Instead, she found herself in a dimly lit bedroom that screamed masculine power. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Charleston's harbor, and a king-sized bed dominated the space with military precision. The door clicked shut behind her just as footsteps approached in the hallway. "She went this way, Mr. Blackthorn." Her blood turned to ice. Kieran Blackthorn himself was hunting her down like she'd stolen the family silver. She'd heard enough whispered conversations at the gallery to know that crossing him was career suicide in Charleston's art world. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. "Leave us," came a voice that could have cut glass. Serafina frantically scanned the room for another exit, but the windows were too high, and the bathroom door was across an expanse of Persian carpet that might as well have been a minefield. She pressed her back against the wall beside an enormous armoire, praying the shadows would swallow her whole. The door opened with deliberate slowness. Kieran Blackthorn stepped inside, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and eyes that could have been carved from Arctic ice. His black tuxedo fit like it had been sewn onto his body, and there was something predatory in the way he moved. He knew exactly where she was. Enjoying the tour? His voice held no warmth, just quiet menace. Serafina lifted her chin, channeling every etiquette lesson her judge father had drilled into her. "I was looking for the powder room." "In my bedroom?" "Your security is lacking if guests can wander this far by accident." A smile ghosted across his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing happens in this house by accident." He moved closer, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker, something that made her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with fear. Well, not entirely fear. "Serafina Whitmore," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a judgment. Daughter of Judge Harrison Whitmore. New curator at the Pemberton Gallery. 22 years old. Graduated summa cum laude from Savannah College of Art and Design. The blood drained from her face. "How do you? I make it my business to know who enters my home." He stopped just close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "Especially when they have such interesting family connections." "I don't know what you mean." "Your father presided over some fascinating cases 15 years ago. Cases that were buried a little too quickly, if you ask me." Serafina's mouth went dry. She had no idea what he was talking about, but the way he said it made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark. "I should go," she whispered. "Should you?" He reached past her, his arm brushing her shoulder as he opened the armoire door. Inside hung a collection of photographs, all showing the same young boy with dark hair and Kieran's eyes. In every picture, the boy was laughing, carefree, alive. "My brother Tobias," Kieran said quietly. "He would have been 23 next month." The past tense hit her like a physical blow. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Are you?" His hand was still on the armoire door, trapping her between his body and the wall. "Your father didn't seem particularly sorry when he closed the investigation into Tobias's death." "My father is a good man. He would never." "Wouldn't he?" Kieran's eyes bored into hers. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore, what do you know about the Riverside property fire of 2010? "Nothing." She knew absolutely nothing, but something in his expression told her that ignorance wouldn't save her. Whatever had happened 15 years ago, whatever connection existed between their families, Kieran Blackthorn believed she was part of it. "I was 7 years old," she said. "Old enough to remember." His thumb traced along the edge of one photograph. "Old enough to have been there." "I wasn't." "Weren't you?" He closed the armoire with a soft click. "Funny thing about memory. Sometimes it takes the right trigger to bring everything back." Serafina's knees felt weak. She had no memory of any fire, any property, any connection to this man or his dead brother. But the certainty in his voice made her question everything she thought she knew about her own past. "I need to leave," she said again, her voice barely a whisper. This time he stepped aside, but his eyes never left her face. "Of course. But Serafina?" She turned back at the door. Charleston is a small town. We'll be seeing a lot of each other." It sounded like a promise and a threat rolled into one. Serafina fled, her heels clicking against the marble floors as she made her way back to the party. But she could feel his gaze burning into her back until she disappeared into the crowd of Charleston's elite, all of them blissfully unaware that her world had just shifted on its axis. Behind her, in the privacy of his bedroom, Kieran Blackthorne smiled. The game had finally begun. The coffee shop on King Street buzzed with Monday morning energy, but Serafina couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. 3 days had passed since the charity gala, 3 days of jumping at shadows and checking over her shoulder. She'd barely slept, replaying every word of her encounter with Kieran Blackthorne. Her phone buzzed against the marble tabletop. Unknown number. "Did you sleep well, Serafina?" Her blood chilled. She spun around, scanning the crowded cafe, but saw only tourists and locals absorbed in their morning routines. No sign of piercing blue eyes or predatory smiles. Another text arrived. "The white roses suit you better than red, don't you think?" Serafina's gaze snapped to the counter where she'd been sitting moments before ordering her latte. A single white rose lay beside her laptop, pristine petals stark against the dark wood. She hadn't seen anyone approach her table. Her hands trembled as she typed back, "What do you want?" The response came immediately. "To finish our conversation." She grabbed her things and bolted for the door, but not before catching sight of a familiar figure in the reflection of the window. Kieran sat in a black sedan across the street, phone in hand, watching her with the patience of a hunter who knew his prey had nowhere to run. By Tuesday, the roses had multiplied. One appeared on her desk at the Pemberton Gallery, another tucked behind her car's windshield wiper, a third waiting outside her apartment door. No cards, no messages, just those perfect white blooms that felt more like a countdown than a courtship. "Someone's got an admirer," teased Monica, her gallery assistant, as she arranged the latest delivery in a crystal vase. "These must have cost a fortune. Do you know how hard it is to get roses this perfect in November?" Serafina didn't answer. She was too busy staring at the security footage on her computer screen, rewinding the same 30 seconds over and over. The delivery man appeared at 11:47 a.m., left the roses, and disappeared. But in the corner of the frame, she could make out the edge of a black sedan parked just outside the camera's range. Her phone rang, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. Serafina Whitmore speaking. "You look beautiful when you're concentrating." The voice was silk over steel, instantly recognizable. She spun toward the gallery's front windows, but the street appeared empty. "Where are you?" "Does it matter? I wanted to discuss a business proposition." "I'm not interested in any business with you." "You haven't heard the offer yet." There was amusement in his tone, as if her resistance entertained him. "I'm acquiring several new pieces for my private collection. Significant pieces. The kind that could make a curator's career." Despite herself, Serafina felt a flutter of professional interest. The art world in Charleston was small, and opportunities for major acquisitions were rare. "What kind of pieces?" 19th century American landscapes. A complete series from an estate sale in Virginia, worth approximately $2 million. Her breath caught. That kind of acquisition would put the Pemberton Gallery on the map nationally. But nothing came without a price, especially from Kieran Blackthorne. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Just a dinner meeting to discuss the details. Tonight, 8 o'clock. I'll send a car. I can drive myself." "I'm sure you can do many things, Serafina, but I prefer to handle my own transportation arrangements." The line went dead before she could respond. At 7:30, Serafina stood in front of her bedroom mirror, second-guessing every choice. The black dress was professional but flattering, the heels high enough to project confidence without appearing desperate. She'd told herself this was just business, but her racing pulse suggested otherwise. Her doorbell rang at exactly 8 o'clock. The driver was professional and silent, offering no information about their destination as they wound through Charleston's historic district. They passed Rainbow Row, then the Battery, before turning onto a private road that led to the water. At the end of the drive sat a restaurant she'd never seen before, a converted antebellum mansion with warm lights spilling from its windows. "Miss Whitmore." A hostess appeared at her elbow. "Mr. Blackthorne is waiting for you in the private dining room." The private dining room turned out to be a glass-walled conservatory overlooking the harbor. Kieran stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him as he gazed out at the water. He'd traded his tuxedo for a charcoal suit that somehow made him look even more dangerous. "You came," he said without turning around. "You made it difficult to refuse. I could have made it impossible." He faced her then, and she was struck again by the intensity of his stare. "But I prefer willing participation." The words carried a double meaning that made her cheeks burn. She focused on the business at hand. "About these paintings." "Of course." He pulled out her chair with old-world courtesy that felt like a trap. "The Riverside Collection, 12 landscapes by Thomas Whitmore, painted between 1885 and 1889. Serafina froze halfway to sitting down. "Thomas Whitmore? Your great-great-grandfather, if I'm not mistaken. Quite the talented artist, from what I understand. It's a shame his work has been hidden away for so long." Her legs gave out, and she sank into the chair. Thomas Whitmore's paintings had been lost in a house fire when she was a child. Her father had mourned their destruction for years, claiming they were the only connection left to their family's artistic legacy. "That's impossible. Those paintings were destroyed." "Were they?" Kieran took his seat across from her, pouring wine from a bottle she hadn't noticed. "Or were they simply relocated for safekeeping? Where did you get them? Does it matter? What matters is that I have them, and you want them. The question is, what are you willing to do to get them back?" The trap snapped shut around her, and Serafina finally understood. This wasn't about art or business or even attraction. This was about power, and she was the pawn in a game she didn't understand. But as she met his gaze across the candlelit table, she realized something that terrified her more than his schemes. She wanted to play. The Pemberton Gallery had never seen anything like it. Kieran Blackthorne walked through the main exhibition hall like he owned it, which, Serafina was beginning to suspect, he might actually do. 2 weeks had passed since their dinner, and he'd made good on his promise. The Thomas Whitmore collection now graced the gallery's walls, drawing visitors from across the southeast. "The maritime piece in the corner," Kieran said, stopping before a painting of Charleston Harbor circa 1887. "It needs better lighting." Serafina watched him study the canvas with the intensity of a man solving a puzzle. He'd been here every day since the exhibition opened, always finding something that needed adjustment, always ensuring their paths crossed. "The lighting is fine," she said. "The shadows are obscuring the detail work in the lower right quadrant." He moved closer to the painting, close enough that she could smell his cologne. "Your great-great-grandfather was meticulous about his brushwork. It deserves to be seen properly." She hated that he was right. She hated that he knew more about her family's artistic legacy than she did. Most of all, she hated the way her pulse quickened every time he appeared. "I'll have maintenance adjust it," she said. "Good." He turned to face her, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. "Have dinner with me tonight." "I don't think that's appropriate." "Why?" "Because you're afraid of what people will think, or because you're afraid of what you might do." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Mr. Blackthorne." "Kieran." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Say my name, Serafina." The way he said her name made her stomach flip. She took a step back, but he followed, closing the distance between them until she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "This is my workplace," she said. "Then we'll go somewhere else. I'm not interested in playing games." "Aren't you?" His hand came up to rest against the wall beside her head, not quite trapping her, but making escape impossible. "You've been watching me just as much as I've been watching you." She had been. God help her, she had been. Every time he entered the gallery, every time he moved through the space with that predatory grace, she found herself unable to look away. It was like watching a storm approach, terrifying and beautiful and utterly mesmerizing. "One dinner," he said. "No games, no ulterior motives. Just two people having a conversation. You don't do anything without ulterior motives." "You're right." His admission surprised her. "But maybe you're motive enough." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her standing in front of her ancestors' painting with her heart hammering against her ribs. That evening, she found herself in the passenger seat of his black Porsche, racing through the countryside outside Charleston. He'd picked her up at 8, said nothing about their destination, and she'd been too proud to ask. The silence between them was charged, electric, like the air before a thunderstorm. "Where are we going?" she finally asked as they turned onto a dirt road. "You'll see." The road wound through moss-draped oaks before opening onto a clearing where an old plantation house stood against the darkening sky. It was beautiful in a haunting way, with columns that had weathered decades of storms and gardens that had grown wild with neglect. "What is this place?" "The Riverside property," Kieran said, parking the car. "Where it all began." Her blood turned cold. "This is where your brother died, where your family killed him." The words hit her like a physical blow. She reached for the door handle, but his hand caught her wrist. "Don't run," he said quietly. "Not yet. Let me go." "Look at me, Serafina." She turned reluctantly and was shocked to see pain in his eyes instead of anger. "I brought you here because I need you to understand. 15 years ago, this house was supposed to be demolished. Your Uncle Marcus was the developer in charge of the project. My Uncle Marcus lives in Atlanta. He's never been involved with Charleston real estate, hasn't he?" Kieran's grip on her wrist tightened. The night of the fire, there was a party. Rich kids from the private schools, drinking and making noise. Tobias was 17, stupid, thought he was invincible. He broke into the house on a dare. Serafina could see where this was heading, and it made her sick. "The fire started in the basement," Kieran continued. "Faulty wiring," the official report said. "But Tobias was trapped on the second floor. The smoke got him before the flames did." "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for your loss, but I don't understand why you're telling me this." "Because someone else was in that house that night. Someone who got out before the fire department arrived. Someone whose family had connections powerful enough to keep their name out of the investigation." "You think it was me?" The words came out as a whisper. "I know it was you." He released her wrist and reached into his jacket, pulling out a small object. "This was found in the debris. Recognize it?" It was a child's bracelet, silver with a small charm in the shape of a paintbrush. Serafina's hand flew to her throat, where an identical bracelet hung on a chain beneath her dress. "My father gave me that for my 7th birthday," she said. "I lost it somewhere, but I don't remember." "Don't you?" Kieran's voice was deadly quiet. "Or did your family make sure you wouldn't remember?" The world tilted around her. Fragments of memory flickered like half-remembered dreams. Voices in the darkness, the smell of smoke, someone carrying her through the trees. But it was impossible. She would remember something like that, wouldn't she? "I need to go home," she said. "Not yet." He got out of the car and came around to her side, opening the door with the same courtesy he'd shown at the restaurant. "There's something else you need to see." Against her better judgment, she followed him up the front steps. The door was unlocked, and he pushed it open with ease. Inside, the house was a shell of its former grandeur. Charred beams stretched across the ceiling like broken ribs, and the smell of old smoke still lingered in the air. "The basement," Kieran said, leading her toward a door at the back of the house. "I don't want to see it." "But you need to." He opened the door, revealing stairs that descended into darkness. "This is where it started, Serafina. This is where everything went wrong." She followed him down the stairs, her heart pounding with each step. At the bottom, he flicked on a flashlight, illuminating a space that had been partially rebuilt. New electrical work snaked along the walls, and the floor had been replaced with fresh concrete. "Your Uncle Marcus bought this property 6 months ago," Kieran said. "He's been renovating it quietly, probably planning to flip it for a profit. But he made one mistake. He shone the light on a section of wall where the drywall had been removed, revealing old wooden studs. Carved into one of the beams, in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "Serafina was here." The memory hit her like a freight train. She was 7 years old again, scared and alone in the dark basement while voices argued upstairs. She'd carved her name into the wood with a nail she'd found, marking her presence in case something happened to her. And something had happened. The fire had started, and someone had carried her out, and then... "My father," she whispered. "He was here. He came to get me." "Your father was part of it," Kieran said. "The cover-up, the falsified reports, the destruction of evidence. He knew you were in that house when Tobias died, and he made sure no one would ever find out." Serafina sank to her knees on the concrete floor, overwhelmed by the weight of 15 years of buried truth. She remembered now, remembered the fear and the smoke and the terrible knowledge that someone else was trapped in the house above her. Someone who didn't make it out. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't remember." Kieran knelt beside her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "I know you didn't, but now you do. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The storm hit Charleston like a living thing, clawing at windows and howling through the streets with the fury of something betrayed. Serafina sat in her apartment, watching the rain lash against the glass while her world crumbled around her. 3 days had passed since the basement revelation. 3 days of avoiding phone calls from her father and sleepless nights haunted by recovered memories. Her phone buzzed for the 100th time. Dad calling. She let it go to voicemail. The power flickered, plunging her living room into darkness before the emergency lighting kicked in. Outside, Charleston was battening down for what the weather service was calling the worst storm in a decade. Most people were home with their families, safe and warm and blissfully unaware that their comfortable world was built on lies. A knock at her door made her jump. "Serafina?" Kieran's voice carried through the wood, rougher than usual. "I know you're in there." She didn't move. She hadn't spoken to him since that night at Riverside, couldn't bear to see the knowledge in his eyes or feel the weight of his expectations. "The gallery flooded," he called. "Emergency services can't get through until morning. I thought you should know." The gallery. Her job, her career, her carefully constructed life washing away with everything else. She opened the door to find Kieran soaked to the skin, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, and his expensive shirt clinging to his chest. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough." He stepped inside without invitation, water dripping onto her hardwood floors. "The Thomas Whitmore collection is safe. I had it moved to climate-controlled storage yesterday." "You what?" "I saw the weather reports. Charleston floods at the first sign of heavy rain, and these paintings are irreplaceable." He pulled off his jacket, revealing arms corded with muscle and a chest that made her mouth go dry. "I wasn't going to let your family's legacy get destroyed twice." The simple kindness of the gesture broke something inside her. She sank onto her couch, wrapping her arms around her knees like she could hold herself together through sheer force of will. "Why are you here, Kieran?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. "Because you looked like you were about to shatter the other night, and I couldn't leave you alone with that." "Isn't that what you wanted? To break me?" "No." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as her. "I thought it was, but watching you fall apart in that basement, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like I was destroying something beautiful." Thunder crashed overhead, and the lights flickered again. In the intermittent darkness, she could see the exhaustion etched in his features, the way his shoulders carried the weight of 15 years of grief and rage. "Tell me about him," she said quietly. "About Tobias." Kieran's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because I need to understand. I need to know who died because of my family's cowardice." He moved to the window, staring out at the storm-lashed city. He was supposed to be the good one, the charming one. "I was always too serious, too driven, but Tobias could make anyone laugh. He wanted to be a marine biologist, spent every summer volunteering at the aquarium." "How much older were you?" 11 years. Old enough to feel responsible for him, young enough to think I was invincible." His reflection in the window looked haunted. "The night he died, I was at college in Virginia. I got the call at 3 in the morning. By the time I made it home, he was already gone, and the investigation was already being swept under the rug." "What did you do?" "What could I do? I was 19 years old, and everyone was telling me it was an accident. The fire department, the police, even our own lawyer. They all had the same story. Faulty wiring, tragic accident, case closed. But you didn't believe them." "I couldn't." He turned from the window, and she saw the pain he'd been hiding behind his cold facade. Tobias was terrified of fire. Had been since he was little, after watching a neighbor's house burn down. He would never have gone into that basement, especially not if he smelled smoke. "So you started investigating on your own." "I hired private detectives, pulled building permits, tracked down everyone who was at that party. It took me years to piece together what really happened, and by then, the statute of limitations had run out on most of the potential charges." The lights went out completely this time, plunging them into darkness broken only by the occasional flash of lightning. Serafina heard Kieran move across the room, felt the couch dip as he sat beside her. "I found your bracelet in the police evidence locker," he said. "It had been logged, and then conveniently lost when the case was closed. But the desk sergeant was a friend of my father's, and he remembered a 7-year-old girl being brought in that night. Scared, covered in soot, couldn't remember anything about what happened." "Memory suppression," Serafina whispered. "My father took me to a therapist after that. Said I was having nightmares about a fire that never happened. Except it did happen, and you were there." Lightning illuminated his face, and she saw something she'd never expected to see in Kieran Blackthorne's eyes. vulnerability. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could smell the rain, and something uniquely him that made her pulse quicken. "I should hate you," he said quietly. "You're the living reminder of everything I lost, everything that went wrong. But I can't. God help me, I can't." "Kieran." His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so ruthless. "I've spent 15 years planning my revenge, and now I can't tell the difference between wanting to destroy you and wanting to protect you." The confession hung between them like a live wire. Serafina knew she should pull away, should maintain the distance that kept her safe from the storm brewing in her chest. Instead, she turned toward him, guided by instinct and the magnetic pull that had been drawing her to him since that first night. "I remember more now," she whispered. "I remember hearing someone screaming upstairs. I wanted to help, but I was too scared to move. You were 7 years old. I could have saved him." "No." His free hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away tears she didn't realize she was crying. "You would have died too, and then I would have lost you both." The words slipped out before he could stop them, revealing a truth that changed everything. In the darkness, with the storm raging around them and the weight of the past pressing down like a physical force, Serafina finally understood what she was seeing in his eyes. It wasn't just attraction or obsession or the twisted satisfaction of a plan coming together. It was love, raw and desperate, and completely terrifying. "This is insane," she breathed. "I know. We barely know each other. I know. Your brother died because of my family. I know." His forehead touched hers, and she could feel his breath against her lips. "But I also know that I've been falling for you since the moment I found you in my bedroom, and I don't know how to stop." The storm outside reached a crescendo, and something inside Serafina finally broke free. She closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his with 15 years of buried guilt and newfound longing. He tasted like rain and redemption, like all the dangerous things she'd spent her life avoiding. When they finally broke apart, the storm was beginning to subside, and the first pale light of dawn was creeping through the windows. But the real tempest was just beginning. The courthouse smelled like old leather and broken promises. Serafina sat in the parking lot, staring at the imposing brick building where her father had spent 30 years dispensing justice. 3 weeks had passed since the storm, 3 weeks of stolen moments with Kieran that felt like living in a dream she was terrified to wake up from. But dreams had a way of colliding with reality, and today she was going to confront the man who'd shaped her entire understanding of right and wrong. Her phone buzzed. A text from Kieran. "You don't have to do this alone." She typed back, "Yes, I do." Judge Harrison Whitmore's chambers were exactly as she remembered from childhood visits. Walls lined with law books, a massive mahogany desk, and photographs of politicians and dignitaries who'd sought his counsel over the years. Her father looked up from a stack of legal briefs when she knocked, his weathered face breaking into a smile that made her chest ache. "Sarah, sweetheart, what a wonderful surprise." He rose to embrace her, and she caught the familiar scent of pipe tobacco and Old Spice that had meant safety for the first 22 years of her life. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding my calls. We need to talk, Dad." Something in her tone made him step back, the smile fading from his gray eyes. "Of course. Sit down. Can I get you some coffee? This isn't a social visit." She remained standing, needing the advantage of height for what was coming. "I know about Riverside. I know about Tobias Blackthorne. I know what you did." The color drained from his face. He sank into his chair like a man who'd been expecting this moment for 15 years. "How? Does it matter? What matters is that you let a 17-year-old boy die and then covered it up to protect your brother. Sarah, you don't understand the whole situation. Then explain it to me." Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "Explain how you could close an investigation when you knew there was more to the story. Explain how you could look at that boy's family every day in this town and live with yourself." Judge Whitmore aged 10 years in the space of a heartbeat. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a bottle of bourbon, pouring himself a drink with hands that trembled slightly. "Your Uncle Marcus was in serious trouble," he said finally. "Gambling debts to some very dangerous people. The kind of people who don't accept payment plans. So you helped him burn down a building for the insurance money?" "God, no." He drank deeply, then set the glass down with a sharp click. "The fire was an accident. But Marcus was there that night, meeting with some investors about the development project. When the fire started, he panicked and ran, and left Tobias to die. Marcus didn't know anyone was in the building. The party had been shut down by security hours earlier. How could he have known some kid would break back in? Serafina's stomach churned. But you found out later. Marcus called me that night, hysterical. Said there was a boy in the building. Said he could hear someone screaming for help. By the time the fire department arrived, it was too late. You could have told them. You could have made sure Marcus faced charges for fleeing the scene. With what proof? Marcus's word against the investigators? And meanwhile, his creditors would have killed him for the insurance money he owed them. Judge Whitmore looked older than she'd ever seen him. I made a choice to protect my family. What about the Blackthorn family? What about Justice? Justice? He laughed bitterly. Sarah, you were in that building too. You and Marcus both. If the full truth had come out, you would have been charged as accessories to negligent homicide. You were 7 years old. The room spun around her. I was with Uncle Marcus. He was supposed to be babysitting you while your mother and I were at a dinner party. Instead, he dragged you along to his meeting because he couldn't find a sitter. Her father's voice cracked. When he called me that night, you were unconscious from smoke inhalation. I had to choose between justice for the Blackthorn boy and protecting my own daughter. Serafina gripped the back of a chair to keep from falling. So you destroyed the evidence. I made sure certain details were overlooked. The bracelet, the witness statements placing you at the scene, Marcus's involvement with the property. I convinced everyone it was simpler to rule it an accidental fire. And you had my memory suppressed. Dr. Paulson said it was the kindest thing. You were having nightmares, waking up screaming about fire and smoke. The therapy helped you forget the trauma. It helped me forget that I watched someone die. It helped you have a normal childhood. Judge Whitmore stood, moving around the desk to reach for her. Sarah, I did what any father would do. I protected my child. She stepped back, evading his touch. You protected your brother's criminal negligence. You let the Blackthorns grieve without knowing the truth. You perverted everything you taught me about justice and integrity. I chose family over strangers. I chose you over a boy who was already dead. And now Kieran Blackthorn wants revenge. Her father went very still. You've been in contact with Kieran Blackthorn? He knows everything, Dad. He's known for years. He's been planning this, waiting for the right moment to destroy our family the way we destroyed his. Jesus Christ. Judge Whitmore collapsed back into his chair. Sarah, you have to stay away from him. He's dangerous. He's unstable. He spent 15 years nursing a grudge that could get you killed. He's also the only person who's been honest with me. He's using you to get to me, to get to Marcus. Don't you see that? The terrible thing was, she did see it. Even as she'd fallen for Kieran, even as she'd lost herself in his arms and his whispered promises, a part of her had always known that she was a means to an end. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. Where is Uncle Marcus now? She asked. Atlanta. I haven't spoken to him in months. Sarah, please, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. She turned toward the door, then stopped. I understand that everything I believed about you was a lie. I understand that a good man died because of our family's cowardice. And I understand that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to figure out how to live with that. Sarah, wait. But she was already gone, leaving her father alone with his bourbon and his carefully constructed justifications. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright, the normal world too cheerful for the darkness that had settled in her chest. Her phone was ringing. Kieran's name on the screen. How did it go? He asked when she answered. You were right. About all of it. Her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. My Uncle Marcus was there. My father covered it up to protect him. And me. I'm coming to get you. No. The word came out sharper than she intended. I need some time to think. Serafina. Please, Kieran. I need to process this. She hung up before he could respond, then turned off the phone entirely. But as she drove through Charleston's familiar streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that processing the truth was going to require more than time. It was going to require deciding who she wanted to be, the judge's daughter who'd been raised on lies, or the woman who was brave enough to face the consequences of her family's choices. Either way, she had the sinking feeling that her life as she'd known it was over. The knock came at midnight, sharp and insistent against Serafina's apartment door. She'd been sitting in the dark for hours, replaying her father's confession and trying to reconcile the man who'd taught her about justice with the one who'd perverted it to save his own family. When she opened the door, Kieran stood in the hallway with fury radiating from every line of his body. 3 days, he said, pushing past her into the apartment. 3 days of ignored calls and unanswered texts. I told you I needed time to think. Time to run, you mean? He spun to face her, and she saw something wild in his eyes that made her take a step back. Time to figure out how to disappear before the consequences catch up with you. That's not what I was doing, isn't it? Your father already called his lawyer. I'm sure Uncle Marcus is planning a convenient vacation somewhere without extradition treaties. The casual mention of her uncle's name sent ice through her veins. How do you know about my father's lawyer? Because I've been watching your family for 15 years, Serafina. I know their patterns, their contacts, their escape routes. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Did you really think I'd let you walk away without finishing this? Finishing what, exactly? What is it you want from me? What I've always wanted. Justice for my brother. Tobias is dead. Justice won't bring him back. No, but it might help me sleep at night. He moved closer, and she caught the scent of whiskey on his breath. Do you know what it's like to carry 15 years of rage? To wake up every morning knowing that the people responsible for your brother's death are living comfortable lives while he's rotting in the ground. Kieran, your Uncle Marcus owns a construction company in Atlanta. Blackthorn Industries has been systematically outbidding him for every major contract in the Southeast. He's 6 months away from bankruptcy. The words hit her like physical blows. You've been destroying his business. I've been playing the long game. Marcus first, then your father's reputation, then yours. I was going to take everything from your family the way mine was taken from me. The past tense caught her attention. What changed? You changed everything. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as her. I started watching you to find weaknesses, vulnerabilities I could exploit. Instead, I found myself falling for the woman I was supposed to destroy. So this whole thing, the gallery visits, the dinners, the paintings, it was all part of your plan? At first, he ran his hands through his hair, the careful control he always maintained finally cracking. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about revenge and started being about you. I don't believe you. Don't you? He pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like emails. I've had a dozen opportunities to destroy your family in the past month. Financial records that would end your father's career, evidence that would put Marcus in prison, media contacts who would turn this into a national scandal. But I didn't use any of it. Why not? Because destroying them would have destroyed you too. And I realized I couldn't live with that. Serafina wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the vulnerability she saw in his eyes. But 15 years of planning didn't just disappear because of inconvenient feelings. What do you want from me now, she asked. I want you to help me finish this the right way. Not through revenge, but through justice. Real justice. How? Your Uncle Marcus is the key. He was there that night. He fled the scene, and he's the one person who can corroborate what really happened. With his testimony, we can reopen the investigation. He'll never agree to that. It would mean admitting to criminal negligence. He will if the alternative is losing everything. Kieran's eyes hardened. Blackthorn Industries is about to foreclose on his company. He owes us $17 million in penalties and interest, but I'm willing to forgive the debt in exchange for his cooperation. You want me to convince him to confess. I want you to help me get the truth. For Tobias. For everyone who's been living with lies for 15 years. The weight of what he was asking pressed down on her like a physical force. Convincing Marcus to confess would destroy what was left of her family, but staying silent meant living with the knowledge that she was complicit in covering up Tobias's death. And if I refuse, then I go back to my original plan. I destroy Marcus financially, expose your father's corruption, and make sure everyone knows that the Whitmore family built their reputation on a dead boy's grave. Including me? Something flickered across his face, pain mixed with determination. Including you. The threat hung between them like a blade. Serafina studied his face, looking for any sign that he was bluffing, but saw only the cold resolve that had sustained him through 15 years of planning. You bastard, she whispered. Yes, I am. But I'm a bastard who's giving you a choice. Help me get justice the right way, or watch me get it the wrong way. Some choice. It's more than my brother got. The simple statement cut through all her anger and fear, reminding her why they were standing here in the first place. Tobias Blackthorn had died because of her family's choices, and she was the only one who could make it right. If I do this, she said slowly, If I help you get Marcus to confess, what happens to us? I don't know. His honesty was more painful than any lie could have been. I don't know if we can build something real on a foundation of revenge and lies. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me for using you, or if I'll ever forgive your family for what they took from mine. But you're willing to try? I'm willing to find out. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it despite everything. But first, we need to finish this. For Tobias. For everyone. Serafina looked down at their joined hands, marveling at how something so simple could feel so complicated. She was falling in love with a man who'd systematically manipulated her, who destroyed her uncle's business, and was threatening to destroy her father's career. But she was also falling in love with someone who'd shown her the truth about her family, who'd made her question everything she thought she knew about justice and integrity. Okay, she said finally. I'll help you, but I have one condition. What? When this is over, when Marcus has confessed and the truth is out, you let me decide whether there's an us to salvage. No more manipulation, no more threats. Just honesty. And if you decide there isn't, then you let me walk away. Kieran was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim light from the street. Finally, he nodded. Deal. As he leaned down to kiss her, Serafina wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the first truly honest choice she'd ever made. Either way, there was no going back. The game was almost over, and soon they'd all have to live with the consequences of the truth. The knock came at midnight, sharp and insistent against Serafina's apartment door. She'd been sitting in the dark for hours, replaying her father's confession and trying to reconcile the man who'd taught her about justice with the one who'd perverted it to save his own family. When she opened the door, Kieran stood in the hallway with fury radiating from every line of his body. 3 days, he said, pushing past her into the apartment. 3 days of ignored calls and unanswered texts. I told you I needed time to think. Time to run, you mean? He spun to face her, and she saw something wild in his eyes that made her take a step back. Time to figure out how to disappear before the consequences catch up with you. That's not what I was doing, isn't it? Your father already called his lawyer. I'm sure Uncle Marcus is planning a convenient vacation somewhere without extradition treaties. The casual mention of her uncle's name sent ice through her veins. How do you know about my father's lawyer? Because I've been watching your family for 15 years, Serafina. I know their patterns, their contacts, their escape routes. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Did you really think I'd let you walk away without finishing this? Finishing what, exactly? What is it you want from me? What I've always wanted. Justice for my brother. Tobias is dead. Justice won't bring him back. No, but it might help me sleep at night. He moved closer, and she caught the scent of whiskey on his breath. Do you know what it's like to carry 15 years of rage? To wake up every morning knowing that the people responsible for your brother's death are living comfortable lives while he's rotting in the ground. Kieran, your uncle Marcus owns a construction company in Atlanta. Blackthorn Industries has been systematically outbidding him for every major contract in the Southeast. He's 6 months away from bankruptcy. The words hit her like physical blows. You've been destroying his business. I've been playing the long game. Marcus first, then your father's reputation, then yours. I was going to take everything from your family the way mine was taken from me. The past tense caught her attention. What changed? You changed everything. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as her. I started watching you to find weaknesses, vulnerabilities I could exploit. Instead, I found myself falling for the woman I was supposed to destroy. So this whole thing, the gallery visits, the dinners, the paintings, it was all part of your plan? At first, he ran his hands through his hair, the careful control he always maintained finally cracking. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about revenge and started being about you. I don't believe you. Don't you? He pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like emails. I've had a dozen opportunities to destroy your family in the past month. Financial records that would end your father's career, evidence that would put Marcus in prison, media contacts who would turn this into a national scandal. But I didn't use any of it. Why not? Because destroying them would have destroyed you too. And I realized I couldn't live with that. Serafina wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the vulnerability she saw in his eyes. But 15 years of planning didn't just disappear because of inconvenient feelings. What do you want from me now, she asked. I want you to help me finish this the right way. Not through revenge, but through justice. Real justice. How? Your Uncle Marcus is the key. He was there that night. He fled the scene, and he's the one person who can corroborate what really happened. With his testimony, we can reopen the investigation. He'll never agree to that. It would mean admitting to criminal negligence. He will if the alternative is losing everything. Kieran's eyes hardened. Blackthorn Industries is about to foreclose on his company. He owes us $17 million in penalties and interest, but I'm willing to forgive the debt in exchange for his cooperation. You want me to convince him to confess. I want you to help me get the truth. For Tobias. For everyone who's been living with lies for 15 years. The weight of what he was asking pressed down on her like a physical force. Convincing Marcus to confess would destroy what was left of her family, but staying silent meant living with the knowledge that she was complicit in covering up Tobias's death. And if I refuse, then I go back to my original plan. I destroy Marcus financially, expose your father's corruption, and make sure everyone knows that the Whitmore family built their reputation on a dead boy's grave. Including me? Something flickered across his face, pain mixed with determination. Including you. The threat hung between them like a blade. Serafina studied his face, looking for any sign that he was bluffing, but saw only the cold resolve that had sustained him through 15 years of planning. You bastard, she whispered. Yes, I am. But I'm a bastard who's giving you a choice. Help me get justice the right way, or watch me get it the wrong way. Some choice. It's more than my brother got. The simple statement cut through all her anger and fear, reminding her why they were standing here in the first place. Tobias Blackthorn had died because of her family's choices, and she was the only one who could make it right. If I do this, she said slowly, if I help you get Marcus to confess, what happens to us? I don't know. His honesty was more painful than any lie could have been. I don't know if we can build something real on a foundation of revenge and lies. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me for using you, or if I'll ever forgive your family for what they took from mine. But you're willing to try? I'm willing to find out. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it despite everything. But first, we need to finish this. For Tobias. For everyone. Serafina looked down at their joined hands, marveling at how something so simple could feel so complicated. She was falling in love with a man who'd systematically manipulated her, who destroyed her uncle's business, and was threatening to destroy her father's career. But she was also falling in love with someone who'd shown her the truth about her family, who'd made her question everything she thought she knew about justice and integrity. Okay, she said finally. I'll help you, but I have one condition. What? When this is over, when Marcus has confessed and the truth is out, you let me decide whether there's an us to salvage. No more manipulation, no more threats. Just honesty. And if you decide there isn't, then you let me walk away. Kieran was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim light from the street. Finally, he nodded. Deal. As he leaned down to kiss her, Serafina wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the first truly honest choice she'd ever made. Either way, there was no going back. The game was almost over, and soon they'd all have to live with the consequences of the truth. The Charleston courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when Marcus Whitmore emerged from his arraignment hearing, his lawyer flanking him as camera flashes exploded like lightning. Serafina watched from across the street, her heart breaking for the broken man who'd finally found the courage to face his demons. 3 weeks had passed since his confession, 3 weeks that had turned her world inside out. Her phone buzzed with another interview request. Ever since the story broke, she'd been besieged by journalists wanting the inside perspective on the Whitmore family scandal. She declined them all, just as she declined her father's desperate attempts to reconcile and Kieran's careful offers of support. The truth had set them all free, but freedom came with a price none of them had anticipated. Her father had resigned from the bench in disgrace, his 30-year career reduced to a cautionary tale about the corruption of power. Marcus faced charges of criminal negligence and obstruction of justice, though his lawyer was optimistic about a plea deal. And Serafina had lost her job at the gallery when the board decided that employing a Whitmore was too much of a liability. The only person who'd gained anything from the revelation was Kieran, and even his victory felt hollow. Serafina. She turned to find him approaching from the courthouse, his dark suit making him look like an avenging angel. I've been looking for you. I was watching Uncle Marcus face the consequences of telling the truth. How does it feel to finally get your justice? Empty. The admission surprised them both. I spent 15 years dreaming about this moment, and now that it's here, all I can think about is how much damage we've all done to each other. Regrets, Mr. Blackthorne? About destroying your family? No, they made their choices. His eyes softened. About destroying us. Every damn day. It had been 2 weeks since they'd spoken. 2 weeks since she'd told him she needed space to figure out who she was without the weight of her family's lies. She'd spent the time in a cabin outside Charleston, painting for the first time since college and trying to piece together a life that felt authentically hers. "Walk with me," she said. They made their way through the historic district, past the antebellum mansions and moss-draped oaks that had witnessed centuries of secrets and scandals. The silence between them was charged with everything they'd said and everything they'd left unsaid. "I hired a private investigator," she said finally, "to make sure we had the whole truth." Kieran stopped walking. "What did you find?" "Nothing that changes what happened to Tobias. But I found something else." She pulled a manila envelope from her purse. Evidence that someone else knew about the cover-up and has been using it for blackmail. His face went white. "Who?" "Someone who's been very careful to stay in the shadows while watching all of us destroy each other." She handed him the envelope. "Someone who had access to police files, court records, and enough inside information to orchestrate this entire confrontation." Kieran opened the envelope and stared at the photographs inside. Images of him meeting with city officials, copies of financial transactions between Blackthorne Industries and various Charleston businesses, and most damning of all, a recording device hidden in the Riverside property. "Victoria Ashford," he breathed, recognizing the name on the surveillance reports. "Your father's former law partner. The one who handled Tobias's estate and convinced your family not to pursue the investigation. She's been manipulating all of us. For 15 years. She knew exactly what happened that night, and she's been using it to control every major development project in Charleston. Your revenge against my family was just the latest piece in her game." Kieran's jaw tightened as the full scope of the betrayal sank in. "She let me destroy myself with rage while she profited from my brother's death. And she would have let us destroy each other if I hadn't started digging." Serafina touched his arm. "Kieran, she's planning to buy the Riverside property now that Marcus can't develop it. She's going to tear down the building and erase the last evidence of what happened there. Over my dead body. That might be exactly what she's hoping for." She pulled out her phone. "I recorded a conversation with her yesterday. She thinks I'm going to help her acquire the property through my father's remaining connections. She doesn't know that I know what she's really been doing." They listened to Victoria Ashford's cold, calculating voice as she outlined her plans for the property and her satisfaction at watching the Whitmore and Blackthorne families tear each other apart. When the recording ended, Kieran looked like he wanted to commit murder. "We're going to stop her," Serafina said. "But we have to be smart about it. She's too well connected to bring down with accusations alone." "What did you have in mind?" "A trap. She's meeting me at Riverside tonight to finalize the property transfer. She thinks she's about to win the game she's been playing for 15 years. It's too dangerous. If she's desperate enough to commit blackmail and fraud, there's no telling what she'll do when she's cornered. I won't be alone." She met his eyes. "That is, if you're willing to trust me with this." "Serafina, after everything that's happened, I don't know if we can. I'm not asking about us. I'm asking if you're willing to help me get justice for Tobias the right way, not through revenge or manipulation, but by exposing the person who's been profiting from his death." Kieran studied her face, and she saw the moment he made his decision. "What do you need me to do?" That night, the Riverside property looked like something from a Gothic novel, with fog rolling off the water and moonlight filtering through the skeletal remains of the house. Serafina stood in the overgrown garden, waiting for Victoria Ashford and trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. A car pulled up the drive at exactly midnight. Victoria emerged, elegant even in the darkness, carrying a briefcase that presumably contained the forged documents that would transfer the property to one of her shell companies. "Serafina, darling, I'm so glad you've decided to be reasonable about this. I want to make sure my family's interests are protected. Of course, though I have to say, your family's interests would be better served if you convinced your father to stop making such a spectacle of himself. All this public hand-wringing about justice and integrity is quite unseemly. He's trying to do the right thing." "The right thing?" Victoria laughed. "The right thing was keeping quiet 15 years ago. Your father understood that then, just as you understand it now. What I understand is that you've been manipulating all of us since the beginning." Serafina's voice carried clearly in the still air, and she prayed the hidden recording devices were picking up every word. "You knew exactly what happened the night Tobias died, and you used it to control everyone involved." Victoria's composure slipped for just a moment. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you? You had access to all the police files. You knew Marcus was there, knew about the cover-up, and you've been using that information to blackmail city officials and manipulate development projects for 15 years. You can't prove any of that." "Actually, we can." Kieran stepped out of the shadows, and Victoria's face went white. "Every financial transaction, every blackmail payment, every forged document. We have it all." "Kieran, I should have known you'd be involved in this." Victoria's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Your family always was too emotional for your own good. My family was grieving. You were supposed to help us find justice, not profit from our pain." "Justice?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "Justice doesn't pay the bills, darling. Justice doesn't build empires. I saw an opportunity, and I took it. You let me spend 15 years destroying myself with rage while you got rich off my brother's death. You were going to destroy yourself anyway. At least this way, someone benefited from the tragedy." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Victoria looked around wildly, finally understanding that she'd walked into a trap. "You think this changes anything?" she snarled. "You think exposing me will bring your brother back? Will fix your broken families?" "No," Serafina said quietly, "but it means he can finally rest in peace." As the police cars surrounded the property, Victoria Ashford was arrested for fraud, blackmail, and conspiracy. The empire she'd built on secrets and lies crumbled in a single night, just as the Whitmore family's reputation had crumbled weeks before. But unlike her family's fall from grace, this felt like justice. 6 months later, Serafina stood in the same spot where Tobias Blackthorne had died, but the burned shell of the house was gone. In its place was a memorial garden, with a fountain at its center and a bronze plaque bearing Tobias's name. The Blackthorne Foundation had purchased the property and transformed it into a place of healing rather than haunting. "He would have liked this," Kieran said, joining her beside the fountain. "He always wanted to make things grow. It's beautiful. So are you." She turned to face him, seeing not the cold, vengeful man who'd orchestrated her family's downfall, but someone who'd learned to let go of his anger and find peace in honoring his brother's memory. "I've been thinking about what you said," she continued. "About not knowing if we could build something real on a foundation of lies and revenge. And I think we already have. We exposed the lies, we found the truth, and we chose justice over revenge. That's a pretty solid foundation, don't you think?" Kieran smiled, the first genuinely happy smile she'd ever seen from him. "Are you sure? Because there's no going back from this. If we do this, if we try to build something together, I'm all in. No more games, no more manipulation. Just us." "Just us," she agreed, rising on her toes to kiss him. As the sun set over Charleston Harbor, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Serafina finally understood what her father had been trying to tell her about justice. It wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about truth, forgiveness, and the courage to build something better from the ashes of what came before. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it was about finding love in the most unexpected places. 3 months later, they were married in a simple ceremony overlooking the memorial garden, with only their closest friends as witnesses. Judge Harrison Whitmore, who'd begun rebuilding his life through volunteer work with at-risk youth, walked his daughter down the aisle. Marcus Whitmore, who'd received probation in exchange for his testimony against Victoria Ashford, served as one of the groomsmen. As Kieran slipped the ring onto her finger, he whispered, "You weren't just the storm that destroyed my walls, Serafina. You were the light that brought me back to life." And in that moment, surrounded by the people who'd learned to forgive each other and themselves, Serafina knew that sometimes the most beautiful things really do rise from ashes. 5 years later, the Blackthorne Whitmore Foundation had become one of the most respected charitable organizations in the Southeast. From their headquarters overlooking Charleston Harbor, Serafina and Kieran managed programs that provided legal aid to families affected by corruption, scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing art and marine biology, and support for whistleblowers seeking to expose institutional cover-ups. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that their greatest tragedy had become their life's purpose. Mrs. Blackthorne, Monica, now the Foundation's program director, poked her head into Serafina's office. "Your 3 o'clock appointment is here." Serafina looked up from the grant proposal she'd been reviewing, automatically touching the small swell of her belly that had just begun to show. At 4 months pregnant, she was finally allowing herself to believe that this miracle was real, that after years of building their life together, she and Kieran were about to add another chapter to their story. "Send them in." The visitors were a young couple, maybe 25, holding hands like they were afraid of being separated. The woman had been crying, and the man's jaw was set in a way that reminded Serafina painfully of Kieran in those early days when rage was all that kept him going. "Mr. and Mrs. Chun," Serafina said, rising to greet them. "Please sit down. I understand you've been trying to get justice for your daughter." "For 3 years," Mrs. Chun said, her voice breaking. "The school district keeps saying it was an accident, but we know someone was negligent. We know they covered it up to protect themselves." "And the lawyers you've contacted?" "They all say the same thing," Mr. Chun replied bitterly. "Not enough evidence, too expensive to pursue, better to move on with our lives." "But how do you move on when you know the truth is being buried?" Serafina exchanged a look with Kieran, who'd appeared in the doorway. Even after 5 years of marriage, her heart still skipped when she saw him. He'd kept his edge, that intensity that made him formidable in business, but he'd learned to channel it into protection rather than destruction. "You don't move on," Kieran said, entering the room and taking a seat beside his wife. "You fight, and you find people who will fight with you. Can you help us?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Everyone says the Foundation performs miracles, but I don't need a miracle. I just need someone to listen, someone to care that our daughter mattered." "She mattered," Serafina said firmly, "and we'll help you prove it. That's what we do here. We make sure the truth doesn't stay buried just because it's inconvenient for powerful people." After the Chins left with a detailed action plan and the promise of the Foundation's full support, Serafina and Kieran stood at their office window, watching the sun set over the harbor. In the distance, they could see the memorial garden where their story had really begun, where they'd chosen love over vengeance and truth over comfort. "Do you ever wonder what Tobias would think of all this?" Serafina asked, leaning back against her husband's chest. "Every day." Kieran's arms circled her waist, his hands resting protectively over their unborn child. "I think he'd be amazed that something so beautiful grew out of something so ugly. He'd be proud of you, of the man you became. He'd be proud of us, of what we built together." Serafina turned in his arms, studying the face that had once terrified her and now represented everything safe and certain in her world. The years had softened some of his harder edges, but she could still see the fierce protector beneath the surface, the man who would move mountains for the people he loved. "I have news," she said, unable to suppress her smile any longer. "Good news or bad news?" "The doctor called. We're having a boy." Kieran went very still, and for a moment she worried that he wasn't ready, that the prospect of raising a son brought back too many painful memories of the brother he'd lost. Then his face broke into a grin so bright it could have powered the city. "A son," he whispered, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around the office. "We're having a son. Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." He set her down gently, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "What should we name him?" They both knew the answer before she spoke it aloud. "Tobias," she said. "Tobias Harrison Blackthorne. After both of our families. After the best parts of both of our families." That night, they drove out to the memorial garden and sat by the fountain where their love had finally conquered their past. The bronze plaque gleamed in the moonlight, and Serafina could almost imagine she heard the sound of laughter carried on the evening breeze. "Your nephew is going to be so loved," she whispered to the night air. "And he's going to know your story. The real story, about a boy who wanted to save the oceans and make the world better." Kieran's hand found hers in the darkness, their wedding rings clicking together with a sound like a promise being renewed. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For saving me. For showing me that love is stronger than hate. That building something beautiful is better than tearing something down. For giving me a future I never thought I deserved." "We saved each other," Serafina corrected. And we're going to save our son from ever having to choose between love and loyalty, between family and justice. Promise, promise. As they sat beside the fountain, planning their future and honoring their past, neither of them noticed the small music box that sat on a bench nearby. A music box that played whenever secrets were about to be revealed or new chapters were about to begin. Tonight, its melody drifted across the garden like a blessing, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful stories are born from the ashes of tragedy. And in the distance, Charleston Harbor sparkled under the stars, holding all their secrets and dreams in its ancient, forgiving waters.